Good morning, folks. Thank you for joining us this morning. Today we're here to launch our new report, the State of Minnesota's Economy 2020. We do one of these every year, as you know. We try and change it up every year, just keep it fresh. Hopefully you'll be able to go on this, find us on the website, download it, have a read of it. All the information that we use to produce the report, it's all footnoted, so you can go and download it. It's all open source data, so you can go and, if you're interested, you can recreate, interrogate any of the graphs or information that we have in here. So with that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Martha Njolomole, who will talk you through some of the findings of the report. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Martha Njolomole. I am an economist at the Center of the American Experiment. As John mentioned, so this report here is about how Minnesota is doing economically compared to other states as well as historically. So in our report, we focus on two measures of income. So we looked at GDP per capita as well as per capita personal income. So GDP per capita, as you all know, is just about how much Minnesota is producing divided by all our residents. And per capita personal income is how much income Minnesotans are receiving for their economic activity. So this is money from investment or wages, and it also includes transfer payments from the government. These measures actually allow us to see how much money is available for every Minnesotan for investing, spending, as well as other users. It's a good measure of public welfare. So when you look at our levels of per capita income, Minnesota actually does very well. In 2019, our per capita GDP was $68,000, which is 4.2% higher than the national average. And when we look at our per capita personal income, Minnesota also does pretty well on our levels. In 2018, our per capita personal income was $58,000, which is also 4.1% higher than the national average. However, the issue here is about how our income levels have been changing over time. We're not doing so well when it comes to income growth. Between 2000 and 2019, Minnesota's per capita GDP grew at 20.6%, which is lower than the national average of 25%. In the same way, our per capita personal income grew at 22.1%, which is also lower than the national average. The other issue here is where all this income growth is coming from. When we look at how our income is growing, Minnesota has most of its growth coming from transfer payments instead of money coming from labor or capital investments. Compared to the national average, Minnesota had almost 40% of its growth come from money coming from the government to its individuals instead of actually people working or investing, which doesn't bode well for sustainable growth in the long term. In the same way, when you look at our cities, which most people tend to think are doing very well, this story is also not very good. When you compare our 5 metropolitan areas, which are St. Cloud, Duluth, the Twin Cities, Rochester, and Mankato, we see that we are lagging the national average. When we look at all our cities nationally, they all grew at 42.5%, while only our 2 MSAs beat that growth. The other 3, which are the Twin Cities, Rochester, and Mankato, lagged behind. The same way, when you look at all our peer cities, which are all the other cities that are slightly smaller or bigger than our Twin Cities, we found that Minnesota only outperformed St. Louis and Detroit. So in conclusion, Minnesota is not doing very well in contrast to what most people think. And for that, we also looked at all the other factors that contribute to economic growth so we could analyze what Minnesota is doing wrong and how we can improve. So we did look at the 3 things that contribute to growth, which is labor, capital, and also total factor productivity. So John is going to talk more about that. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Martha. As Martha said, per capita income growth comes from 3 sources. It comes from more labour from a given population. It comes from giving each worker more capital to work with, capital per worker. or it comes from what's called total factor productivity, increasing the productivity of labour, so how much output each unit of labour produces. That really is the most important factor in terms of sustained per capita economic growth. Once we've identified these factors, we can start to look into some of the data and see how Minnesota's doing on that. When we look at labour, there's not too much scope here for Minnesota to produce more per capita income from increased labour. We have some of the highest labour force participation rates and employment ratios in the country. We do have below average weekly hours worked, but then again, the point of all this is not just to work more, it's not just to generate more output, it's to live a good life. And so if we're only producing more output because we're working more or working longer, then it's not necessarily clear that we're better off. The other method that we can use to increase labour productivity, capital per worker, increasing capital per worker, we're actually about on the national median here. We do quite reasonably well compared to some of the other measures on this. Part of that, we believe, is because Minnesota actually has a fairly favourable treatment, favourable tax treatment of capital-intensive manufacturers. We have, we've got some of the lowest tax rates on capital-intensive manufacturing in the country, which has helped us, for example, in this state, weather what's called the China shock of China joining the WTO in 2001. And across the country, we've seen manufacturing job losses since then. In Minnesota, we should have seen above average manufacturing job losses, but we actually saw below average manufacturing job losses. And a lot of that is down, we believe, to the favourable tax treatment of capital intensive manufacturing in the state. That brings us on to increasing the productivity of each amount of labour, total factor productivity. This is perhaps the most difficult concept to grasp. It's a little bit slippery. Broadly, it kind of boils down to innovation, entrepreneurship, knowledge skills of the workers. Now, in terms of the knowledge skills of the workers, we actually have, if you look at education rankings, we generally do quite well. And it's a kind of source of pride in the state. But there is research that shows that once you account for socioeconomic factors, we fall, for example, from ranking 4th in the country to ranking 33rd. We write about it a lot more length in the paper, but it's one of the most interesting parts, I think, that you can look into. Our education system is not doing as well as it's often portrayed. Another way that we can increase human capital is by attracting skilled workers into the state, or by retaining those skilled workers that we have. Unfortunately, we do not too well here. We actually lose workers on net, according to the Internal Revenue Service data, with an income of $50,000 a year and over. If we use income as a proxy for productivity, which is fairly standard in economics, that shows that we're actually losing productive workers in the state, which, if we're trying to increase labour productivity and GDP, is not where we want to be. Another way that we can look at this is innovation. That's another factor of TFP growth. Now, we do actually do quite well here in terms of generating patents. We have some of the best patent creation per million of the population in the country. But when you look at the rate of business creation that we have, it seems quite clear, which is well below average, it seems quite clear that while Minnesota is very good at generating these innovative new ideas, we're not the place where people want to put them into action and where people want to foster them and bring them to fruition. People do tend to go to other states, and that matches with the migration data that we see. So with that in mind, I think what we see here is that when I first moved here in 2017, people used to say that Minnesota was the blue state that worked. I'm not sure people would say that now. And it's very common to find criticism of Minnesota's economic outcomes from the left as well as from the right. And I think it's an interesting time to be involved in this policy debate. Everyone seems to be examining the fundamentals of the state's economic model, and I welcome that. I think that's well overdue. And I think that we need to approach all this with an open, inquisitive mind, and we can have a really fruitful conversation and generate some real progress. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
We're out front of the Capitol. Is this something that, is this a legislative problem? Is the solutions?
To some extent, yeah. One of the issues that we have is that, so for example, with our below average rate of business creation and small business as a share of all businesses, is that we have very high corporate taxes here. We have some of the highest corporate taxes in the country, and we actually want to try and, the government wants to try and increase them still further. Now, we've already got below average, rate of young businesses as a share of all businesses, so that would seem to be a really bad idea, a really bad thing to do. And also in terms of, when we're talking about where people are going to invest, where, high-skilled workers are going to live, they're not going to live where the tax rates are some of the highest in the country. And again, there's a push on to raise those from, third highest in the country to second highest in the country. At some point, we have to stop and say we can't just keep trying to push ourselves to the top of every single one of these tax measures. We just can't keep doing it. And we see the results of this in our below average economic outcomes that we explained in the paper. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.